Good morning, good afternoon. Let's talk about 2020. First, we've had the bushfires raging across Australia, burning 18.6 million hectares and killing 1 billion animals. Then, the US drone hit Baghdad International Airport and took down an Iranian major general. With racial tensions over police brutality reaching a boiling point, then comes in the worst pandemic of recent history. Let's also not forget about the wildfires that swept through a big part of southwestern United States, affecting Canada, and a hotly disputed US elections. So is it over yet? Not quite yet. Amidst these apocalyptic images, each and every one of our lives have also been upended in some way. Some of us are lucky enough to have maintained our livelihood and our work. So today I'd like to discuss the future of work. And to help us discuss these topics and much more, I have three amazing panelists with me. I'd like to introduce you to Rony Gao, who is interpreter, educator, and tech enthusiast. Welcome, Rony.
Thanks
And
for
then
having me.
thanks for coming. And then we have Hongyan Jack Xu, Research and Development Manager at MCIS Language Solutions, and also Mandarin Chinese Conference Interpreter. Welcome, Jack.
Thank you, Xiang. Very nice to be here.
Oh, Jack, your sound is just a little bit on the low end. If you can just adjust it a little
Okay,
bit.
I think I'll talk louder. Is that better?
Sure, yeah, it's a little
Okay.
better. Just make
Okay.
sure you have the right microphone. Thank you. Even though
Yeah.
your headphone does look very fancy. And finally, we have Laura Fulcher, Chief Community Officer at the Center for Social Innovation,
Speak in pause.
CSI, Canada's largest social innovation community, embodied in 3 working spaces across the city of Toronto and 1 in New York City. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you very much for having me.
Great. Thank you so much for taking the time in this busy holidays period. I'd like to start by asking you, how was your 2020? I mean, I assume you've been working remotely. I guess CSI is closed. There's been COVID. Just tell us about how you're doing and how was your year? Let's start with Ronnie, maybe.
Sure, it's been a hell of a ride. I started off this year with my wife expecting a baby, so I was not doing much work in the first 2 months, except following news coming out of China because I had family members there, and COVID-19 was already breaking out in I think late January, early February. But up until that point, I still had no idea what's in store for us in 2020. And around March, April, it had become clear that things are, very abnormal. Actually, up until this year, I had a subscription with a co-working space in downtown Toronto. And I know we have Laura, who is representing the co-working space industry, will be interested to hear what she had to say. But I decided around April and May to downsize the package that I had. So I didn't have to pay as much because we're not really expecting as many in-person meetings. And long story short, 2020 has basically forced me to shift everything that I do over to remote platforms like Zoom. I do teaching, I do learning. I'm actually enrolled in a full-time degree program right now. And also I'm doing freelance interpreting. I don't think there's ever going to be, um, back to normal anytime soon. So we'll expect Zoom to be my office for the foreseeable future.
Thanks, Ronnie. And I guess was it a son or a daughter?
It was a second son.
Second son, COVID baby.
Yeah,
Congratulations, and thanks for sharing your year.
thank you.
What about you, Jack?
Well, yeah, 2020 has definitely been an interesting year. So back in March, I was actually among the first people at my workplace to propose that we consider converting to working remote entirely. Initially the idea was actually dismissed because we were actually planning our 30th anniversary event to be held at the Ontario Science Centre, and a lot of effort actually went into planning that. Plus, our IT solutions weren't quite ready to support an entire organization going remote. And what made it also difficult was that our executive director at the time was largely dismissing COVID as something not that serious. And at the time, she told people that were worried to just take vitamin C. So, part of the challenge in the West, I think, in dealing with COVID was the initial dismissive attitude. But I was actually in China close to the epicenter of the pandemic for, half of December last year and the entire January. So I saw myself the full extent of the horror this pandemic can bring about and how quickly it could get out of control. So I really just pressed my point. And eventually I convinced the entire organization to cancel the anniversary and start planning for remote work. And this actually proved to be quite far-sighted because Ontario went on lockdown soon after that. And so it was really a scramble then for our IT department to transfer any of our existing infrastructure that was not yet cloud-based to be cloud-based, and then still, matching all requirements. And I'm not going to go into the details of how we did that, but here we are today, 9 months into remote work, and I'm happy to say that our entire organization is working remotely. We're coping well, and this is we are a language solutions company, so this is due to a combination in the upswing of video remote interpreting, aligning with just industry trends, and because we are a not-for-profit, we received a few government grants, and as well, I think the most important thing is to have the proper attitude in moving ahead.
Right. Thank you. Good on you that you were ahead of the curve, so to speak. And like it or not, you were in China and you were able to kind of proactively move your organization to a space where it can be ready to work in that space that we're all in right now. So good job, Jack. And let's now turn to Laura. How are you doing?
Yeah, this everybody mentioned already that it's been quite a monumental year. And when we first had the lockdowns at CSI, it really felt like a death knell for co-working and collaborative spaces, because unlike a traditional office space where people typically have an enclosed office, there might be a few employees in there, it makes it much easier to maintain a certain amount of distance, but the very nature of our spaces are intended to be open, and collaboration is really one of the cornerstones of our model. And so if you take away this ability for people to be able to meet in person, we really thought that this could potentially be the end of our business model, of our community, and extending beyond that. But that was kind of the first initial scare. But what we started to do is very quickly our team, and we have quite an extensive team across a number of locations, came together to enhance things that we had already started doing that were a little bit online before, because we have core members who are physically in our spaces. But 2 years ago, we also created a larger, what we call community membership. And so people can be members of the Center for Social Innovation Network, benefit from the learning opportunities, the networking opportunities, but not necessarily rent physical space. So we simply took what we had already been doing there and expanded that, beyond there. One thing that was really great is in the first couple of months, we pooled all of our members and asked who was able to continue paying their rent through the 3 months of the summer, and to what degree. And we were really overwhelmed by the response that many organizations that were in a financial position to do so continued to pay their full rent. Others would pay what they could. And we basically pooled all of those resources to cover the building's expenses. And a number of organizations were able to maintain their space, hoping to return, but without having to have that expense of rent. So that was really an uplifting thing to see. And we have now pivoted, and we'll talk a little bit later about what things might look like in the future. But just on a little more personal note, there were so many things that surprised me about having to come and work at home. And one of them was just the sort of putting the pause button on the hecticness of life, getting to an office building, being stuck there all day to being in a situation at home where I've got more time to prepare food, so I'm eating healthier, I'm not buying takeout, I get to work on my garden a little bit more. So those have really been the upsides for me. And I'm going to try and focus a little bit more on the positives rather than on the negatives. So that's kind of what we've seen on our side.
Thanks, Laura. Yes, I think I already highlighted all of the negatives in my opening statement. So thanks for those balancing comments. And it's great to see that the private sector was able to step in. I guess many of us relied on government grants and so on to survive in this period. But in your case, it sounds like the community really came together and was able to each pitch in. And that's like a great solidarity effort as well. So that's really good to hear. So my second question for all of you, and I think you've covered some of it. I'd like to talk about the challenges and opportunities that this basically the situation has brought upon us. And I think Laura started already. I don't know, Laura, do you want to maybe continue and further your comments? What do you think are some of the challenges and opportunities that this new era brings us?
Sure. I think one of the challenges that I foresee specifically from our perspective is how can we maintain that sense of community specifically within our spaces, but also companies in general. As we know, company culture, office culture is a big thing. People connect over short conversations in the lunchroom or at the photocopier, those kinds of things. And so I think one of the greatest challenges going forward is how are we going to be able to maintain that? How are we still going to have people connected? It's one thing to connect online and discuss work issues and have meetings. We know that that's working very well, and that's not a problem from a productivity perspective. But a danger of having this disconnection could be that people will feel less connected to their places of employment, perhaps less loyal, more apt to jump around. And, we don't know yet what kind of effect that this might have on overall productivity or projects in general. And one of the things that I kind of wanted to bring up, because when I read it, it made me so angry, was this idea that by having many people potentially working from home, that it would be an opportunity to slack off. I don't know if anyone else read this article, but it was in the Financial Post by I believe he's a journalist / lawyer by the name of Howard Levitt, that insinuated that this employees working from home was an opportunity for them to steal time from the company. So that if left to their own devices, employees would simply be sitting around in tracksuits, watching Netflix all day, but clocking in and out sort of and getting paid hourly. And when I read this, I was just livid, because what I see is the exact opposite. Anybody I know who is working from home is working more than they were before. There is no longer this division of start time, stop time. Lunch times and break times are not respected. People, I think employers think you can just eat at your desk. You don't need to be unavailable for a whole hour during the workday. And so this, I think, is also going to be one of the biggest challenges going forward in the future if people are working remotely, is how not to take advantage of their being at home. They have access to their work tools all the time. How do we ensure that they are still going to maintain some kind of work-life balance? So I have so much more to say on that, but I don't want to monopolize the panel, so I'll pass it off to one of the other panelists.
Sure, and I'm sure one of them will have a reaction probably to what you're saying. Rony or Jack, anyone want to?
Well, I can very much relate to what Laura has just said. I mean, as a freelancer, I don't have the luxury of slacking off, unfortunately. And like she said, I've been working more this year. But there are two sides to each coin. There's both the productivity boost and also the fatigue side of the coin. But I will highlight the fact that a lot of times remote working or remote meetings are actually more productive. this is a fact that many people are not willing to admit because they tend to focus on the, the downside of things when everyone is isolated. You're not going to have the water cooler conversations. You're not going to have the team building spirit when you had in the same office. But the thing is that when you have meetings on Zoom, managing time is usually easy. There's no commuting. In my case, I paid a lot of money parking when I had to meet my clients or my students somewhere downtown. And also with my tutoring sessions, which is a big part of what I do, I can easily record all of the sessions and give my students access to the recording in case some of them fail to show up. So there are lots of good things that come with remote meeting. I'll also mention one small example from my personal life, which is something I felt very strongly about. Telehealth. I don't know, those who live in Ontario may have used this service. So starting in around March or April of 2020, it was clear that having lots of walk-in patients visit their family doctors or walk-in clinics was not a good idea. So the province of Ontario pooled doctor resources and their capacities together to basically get them on a hotline. Any patient who is experiencing some sort of syndrome for which you would normally walk into a clinic will now need to call a number, and in minutes you'll be paired with a doctor who happens to be available, and they would ask for your health card numbers and everything, identify who you are, and give you advice, or in some cases prescription. And when I was helping my mother-in-law use that service, I was like, this should have been an option years ago. And it took a pandemic to force us into the 21st century. That is, one of many silver linings from this pandemic. And of course, there are challenges. There are lots of downsides, as Laura and Jack had already mentioned. I would say that the biggest price that we'll need to pay for this new way of doing things is not necessarily the lost productivity or lost tax revenue. In the long run, I think the real cost is people's mental well-being from being physically and socially isolated for such a long period of time. I mean, unfortunately, this kind of the real consequence of this isolation probably won't show until much later. Maybe we'll have data in a few years. This pandemic and its impact will be studied for many years to come, and we'll have to wait and see what we find out later about what is really going on, whether we are better off or worse off because of working from home.
Thanks, Ronnie. Yeah, definitely there's lots of upsides, and thanks for highlighting those. And like you said, many industries were basically ushered into precipitated reform. And in a way, it could be a blessing in disguise as well. Jack, what's your take on this? What do you have anything to add to your colleagues' comments?
Yeah, of course. And I think, another reason why remote meetings could be more productive is that if the meeting was really pointless and unproductive, you could actually get some real work done and nobody would see you not concentrating on the meeting. So that's one of the pluses. But just really quickly, what Laura mentioned before about the article and how people, the article said people could slack off at home and just get paid for it. I really think, that was one of the worries for us as well. And our executive director, again, she was initially, she was converted, but initially she believed that it wasn't possible for people to work at home and still be productive. She was really worried. To her, everyone had to come together and physically see each other, and that was that was her worry. But we proved her wrong. And I really think that if someone is actually able to slack at home and be paid for it, that's really the failure of that person's supervisor, because that means the work was not arranged properly for this person and there's no proper reporting structure which allows that person to then slack off. If you motivate people enough, if you give them the proper workload and give them a proper reporting structure that they have to be accountable to the work, then it's not possible. So really, it's not, maybe, if this is happening to our organization, maybe the organization needs to examine itself to see what it can do to help, with the situation. But, I will mention a few opportunities and challenges now. But the opportunities I will focus on are more related to the language industry, because again, that's where I work. But, we are, COVID shifted everyone's focus to remote services. We were planning to have our own call center for years where we can handle immediate telephone requests, but it was always put on the back burner. But COVID had really propelled this idea forward, and the software solutions company for us, who was providing us with the software to coordinate, interpretation jobs. Now they've put in a lot of resources in developing an immediate phone and also an immediate video component to the software. And we've been working with them for the last 9 months to launch this, and we're looking at around the end of January to have this service finally launched. And a new service opportunity that I'm sure everyone here is familiar with, RSI, or remote simultaneous interpreting. It's kind of halfway in between community interpreting and conference interpreting, because it requires more languages than the normal, number of languages that conference interpreting offers. So this is more opportunity for people who are community interpreters to take more training in simultaneous, and also to earn a higher pay in the work that they do. And it also allows conference interpreters to obtain more work, albeit at a lower level of pay, when there aren't many conferences happening. And so also, I think my job title is quite new. I used to have different titles at MCIS, but research and development manager is new. But it means that organizations during this pandemic can really shift their focus to developing new services, to meet the new norm, and then just help itself move ahead. Now, the challenges, Laura has mentioned this, and Rony as well, so I'll just add on to what they mentioned before. Aside from the lack of collaboration, which Laura mentioned, I think one of the biggest challenges is training new staff and new employees who come on board, because orientation is difficult, training is difficult, because they no longer get to come in and meet everyone, meet their supervisors. Everything is strange to them. So it's hard to build connection and loyalty when you miss that sense of belonging. So this means you need to have increased, meeting times between the supervisor and the new staff, as well as between the new staff and other departments, just to get them familiar with the organization and to build some kind of belonging. So it's vital for organizations to have a flexible video meeting platform which allows concurrent video meetings to allow these new employees to really come on board and feel like they belong. And the final challenge I'll mention here is the mental health and stress levels of employees. We've seen this at our workplace. Some people have to deal with kids that are not going to school, and meanwhile, there is increased workload on them, so they could get really stressed. And we've had people burn out and cry over the phone, to their supervisors, and just say that they really can't handle it anymore. So it's really important to find ways to accommodate these people. For example, flexible work hours is a very good idea. So so these people can work maybe 5 hours, starting from the morning, and then take a few hours break to look after their kids, and then finish their work in the evening. And also, it's very important to roll out trainings on how to handle mental stress, and also leadership training for the supervisors and managers. All these are very important.
Thanks for highlighting these points, Jack. Definitely the themes of adaptation and sustainability, and you've all mentioned the unknown, just the unknown. We don't know how to necessarily work in this new environment, how to amalgamate all these various demands in our lives, and what's our own limits. So Laura, we didn't give you a lot of time earlier. Did you have any points to add?
I don't know if if we want to start taking a forward look, or just in the challenges. I mean,
sure.
Some of I think my Rony and Jack have covered a lot of the challenges and opportunities, which are going to be different for every business, but there are some common ones that I think that they've done a really good job of covering and highlighting. But just to go back a little bit to what both of them mentioned about this danger or challenge of the mental health aspect and the isolation, I definitely agree with that, but in conjunction with the changes that we're going to see in the future, I really hope, and I'm going to be really working hard towards, having people have another outlet for that collaboration and that socialization. So they may be working from home and not be interacting as much with other people during the workday, but my dream vision of the future is that they will be doing that in other spheres. So what I really want to see for the future is that work is no longer going to be the focus of our lives. It's not going to be the central thing that you do from 9 to 5 and then the rest of your life happens in the times around that. I really think that this is a turning point, that we can start having work, because we all have to do it, be a little bit more integrated with our lives. So just like Jack mentioned, this idea of the flex work hours, if people are working from home, why can they not work from 8 till 11 p.m. when their children are in bed and they can really focus for those 3 hours, and then during the day they get to help their children with their homework if they're doing online schooling at home. They get to maybe take them out and play for a couple of hours, all those kinds of things. I think then we're going to see this inserting work within our lives instead of it kind of taking over and everything else is just a secondary factor, because that's huge in the mental health aspect. So I think that even though people will be working individually at home, that they're going to have more opportunities to connect with their families, with their loved ones, and also with their communities. And part of that for me is that there's no doubt that we're going to see huge amounts of real estate and buildings left abandoned, because many businesses, like if you take some of the huge corporations in the US that have already said that they're going to be going remote for the future, well, all their employees will have that option. So what's going to happen to, Microsoft head office? It's massive. So we will now have all of these buildings that we can use to redesign and reactivate. Some of those abandoned buildings in downtown cores where housing is so expensive can be converted to residential, hopefully affordable housing, so that the employees that are going to work maybe at the grocery stores and places that are not able to work remotely don't have to commute from far away from cheaper places, because they can get affordable housing within the areas that they work. I hope some of these spaces will become community spaces where parents can go with their children during the day as well, and interact with others, and just really a revitalization of some of our communities. And I read a really interesting study that was done in Paris about creating what they're calling 15-minute neighborhoods. And so the idea is that you would have within 15 minutes of your home anything that you would need. So you would be able to go and get groceries, you would be able to go to the hardware store, school, work, whatever it might be, all within basically a 15-minute commute at most of your workplace. And by having all of these buildings that are going to be empty and abandoned in the future, we have such an amazing opportunity to be able to convert those and reactivate them. And again, like the new remote working is going to be forcing companies to become more innovative. Jack mentioned already with his company in particular that they had ideas of things that they wanted to do and they were sort of dragging their feet and things are slower. This is really going to push innovation like to the next level completely. And that to me is really exciting. So it's been a very hard year for many, and I really am sorry about people who have suffered and have been affected by COVID, but at the same time, I'm a little bit giddy because I kind of see this as like a little bit of a revolution. We had the Industrial Revolution a long time ago that changed how people work, and now I kind of see this as being what I'm going to dub the humanity revolution, that we're going to be bringing back into some of these like personal aspects into our lives and stop focusing so much purely on the work.
Thank you, Laura. That's a beautiful vision of the future that you've painted. We are running short on time, so I'll ask my fellow panelists maybe 1 minute on your vision of the future. Rony, let's start with you.
Sure, thank you. Well, since the theme is the future of work, I want to take our focus away from the pandemic for a moment and just put things in the broader context of some of the trends that were already picking up speed prior to COVID. And I want to quote Yuval Noah Harari, who is, in my opinion, one of the most brilliant minds who who has a take on this. And he put in his latest book the vision where you basically have to switch multiple careers in your lifetime anyway. So it doesn't really make sense anymore to focus on acquiring skills and preparing yourself for one particular type of job. Because again, I'm just putting my educator's hat on for a moment. Some of my students and clients and even parents ask me for advice when it comes to what they should study, what courses to take. And my answer to them is it doesn't really matter because you're going to change careers anyway. And Harari used the analogy, which I think is very powerful. He said, for decades, our education has been trying to build forts to give students the foundation that's really, really solid and make sure they will stick to that one field for as long as they can. And in the 21st century, our vision should be the complete opposite. We should be teaching them how to build tents so that they can wrap up everything and move on when the storm comes. So instead of building really, really strong skills in one field, we should train them to be versatile and flexible and adaptive. And I think that is my vision as well for the future of work and the future of education.
Thank you, Ronnie. Since we're running short on time, Jack, do you want to have a 30-second elevator speech?
Yes, I can wrap up quickly. So, I do think that there is more work opportunities actually, for employers, because now with the remote host model, they don't have to stick to their local city to find talent. They can go beyond that, and they could even go international. And this also means more work opportunities for those, who, to work for a dream company that was previously beyond their reach because, geographically they were in a different location. And I just want to end with a quote from one of my colleagues from many years ago when I was still working for MCIS, but my desk, I went to a different workspace, so my desk got smaller. So I was complaining about that. I was whining and saying my desk got smaller. And he said something. He said, well, the best jobs in the world have no desks. And I had no idea how visionary that statement was until today. So I'll just end at that point.
Thank you for that beautiful quote from your colleague. You're all very well educated with all your quotes and so on. Well, thank you to all three of our panelists. I think you've broached on really interesting themes, and I wish we could continue this conversation. I myself have goosebumps too, just envisioning all that is possible for the future for all of us. And let's end on this optimistic note then. Until next time, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.